Hi, I'm back to talk a little more on our plant walk, go through some different plants in the yard that are incredible medicine. If you remember last week, I talked about Dyer's woad, Isatis tinctoria, and specifically that it was invasive, and that I wanted to talk about more plants that are invasive, considered to be invasive, and how we get medicine from them. There's a lot of plants like this throughout the U.S., like kudzu, for instance, is a really good example. Um, this week, what I want to talk about is actually Houttuynia cordata. Now, before I get there, though, I just want to say, I talk about, I use the term invasive, and I used to kind of have a problem with that term. I always used to say opportunistic is a better term, and it truly is. I feel that any plant that is invasive, it's really that it's a plant that's able to it's not opportunistic and is able to grow in its environment faster and better than other species around it. And this is oftentimes due to human interference. For instance, here in the hill country and throughout this entire region here, central Texas, junipers, for instance, the Juniperus ashii, and specifically in this area, ash juniper is considered to be invasive, highly invasive. Well, that had happened back in the turn of the last century, with overgrazing and like a couple of decades of drought, where a lot of clearing of the land, to where juniper was one of the only plants that was really able to grow very well in that process and in that environment. So a lot of time, that's one small example, but we oftentimes create these opportunistic advantages for plants around us, and plants just do what plants do and grow like any other living thing, find a niche and grow really well. And I would also argue that it has to do with the earth itself. For instance, if you um, uh, plow a huge furrow in the earth, or you make a big road and you clear cut a bunch of stuff and make a big road, look at the plants that come back in those disturbed areas, and look at the plants that replace and start to kind of heal over that area, that part. If you could think of that huge road or a mine or whatever as more of, think of it as like our body. Think of it as if you made a laceration on your own body. What cells are going to be there to first start that wound healing process and the inflammation process? And a lot of times these plants, in my opinion, relate to inflammation of the earth that we create as humans. We are inflammation, or we create inflammation. And the irony of it is a lot of the plants that grow that are these invasive species are actually really very superior herbal medicine for inflammation and inflammatory processes, and in enhancing our own inflammatory process so that we get through them faster and we get into wound healing, tissue healing. So today's plant is a lot like that. Houttuynia cordata is a very, very powerful, potent anti-inflammatory, in particular for the respiratory tract is how I use it, but also for the urinary tract, and is considered, again, another one of those plants that clears toxic heat in Chinese medicine, right? So Yu Xing Cao is the Chinese name, the pinyin of it that we use in TCM, and that means fish plant, basically, and it's considered, sometimes called fishy smelling herb, or fishy smelling plant, and it does. It smells kind of, the stem actually when it's fresh smells that way, but it's when it's dried, it actually doesn't at all. And in fact, it's a very tasty herb in my opinion, and it's used as food in Asian cultures. And I use, so this is a plant that's both the leaf or the aerial parts are used, but I like to use the root as well, actually. And I don't know if anybody else does that, but I do, and I like it. I think it's very effective, and so I mix the root and the aerial parts. So I use the whole plant. And again, it's one of those plants that just grows like crazy. It reproduces by rhizome, it reproduces by seed, and it'll go crazy. It'll take an area over. It'll take over a garden if you don't keep it under control. So on the subject of inflammation and invasives, the way I was mentioning and comparing, this is the way I use this plant a lot, is for inflammation of the respiratory tract. I use it for the urinary tract as well, but the respiratory tract is probably the main way I use this plant. I feel it as a mast cell inhibitor, so whether it's acute or acute flare-ups of chronic disease, or even chronic, it's gentle enough to use for chronic illness. And when I'm talking about that, what I mean are things like asthma, COPD, but I also mean acute flare-ups of those two issues, or even allergic allergic reaction to, say, seasonal allergies to, pollen or whatever it may be. And this could be sinusitis that's allergic. It could be even sinusitis that's viral or even bacterial, or a recurring sinusitis that may be related to biofilms. You could use it as a neti pot. You can use it as a nausea oil. You can use it as a nasal rinse, intranasally, as well as orally. You can use it topically. You could use it for eczema. You can use it for poison oak or poison ivy. Any of these kind of inflammatory conditions where there's a lot of heat, there may be an infection, again, whether viral or bacterial. These are places where this comes in really handy. Now, I compared it or mentioned the concept of toxic heat in TCM, or traditional Chinese medicine, and how we see that same idea playing out, in herbs that we can use this way. For instance, I mentioned Echinacea angustifolia last time, and of course, Isatis tinctoria was the herb I was talking about. It works also very well with Yerba Santa. That's a herb that I've used it a lot for COVID infections. So I would say probably its biggest claim to fame in the last year has been use in formulas for COVID specifically, and especially in that inflammatory process that happens that may not even be so much respiratory as even intravascular, right? And the endothelial cells in the vascular system. And maybe that's where it plays a role there too, because it is very, very soothing of that type of inflammatory heat and that type of process. Let's talk for just a few seconds about medicine making, because this is a plant that I feel works much better as a multifractional extract. This isn't one that you want to do just a sprayed up tincture on. You want to get a good water extraction of it as well. So I do a water and glycerin, and I even put in a little bit of honey and a tiny bit of ACV in there as well, and it ends up tasting really, really good. Plus, it's a better quality product. When you get done with that, with the water extraction, then what I go ahead and do is strain it and go ahead and do an alcohol rinse, a 95% alcohol rinse, and I let it sit at about 40% alcohol as the final shelf-stable version of this as a multifractional extract. All right, hopefully that was useful for you, and we will come back here next week and talk about, let's pick some more invasive plants, invasive or opportunistic species, and the incredible medicine that we can get from them. Let's just stay on that theme for a few weeks here, because I've got plenty of them, and there's plenty of them just naturally growing around here as well that we can talk about.